morning is Promises and Tensions. REACH and the CBR Collaborative and the AHA Centre have been on a journey together, which is part, of course, of a larger journey of Indigenous community and researchers and allied researchers and community. Even though our research deals with sometimes difficult issues, the experience can be full of laughter and a sense of partnership from the many places and the common experiences we build together, as well as the differences we experience. But other times, things don't go so well, and there's tension to work through, sometimes because of personal issues that team members have, their own personal progress in the process of decolonization, or issues with project processes and adhering to good ways of doing things, and sometimes because of structural issues that don't let you move forward in the way that you would actually like to if you could. But the principle is that we travel side by side with respect and with autonomy. After a long history of colonization, we're coming back to these principles as part of the decolonizing work, at least within some, I'll call them research approaches, but we could call them knowledge building approaches or inquiry approaches. And what I've put up here, I don't know if you can read it, I'll just read the bottom bit, and I'm not going to pronounce this properly, but it's the notion of the two-row wampum, or Guzwenta. This is the settlers as they settled in the southern United States and around Massachusetts and New York now. The Haudenosaunee and the Dutch discovered much about each other, and an agreement was made as to how they were to treat each other and live together. Each of their ways would be shown in the purple rows running the length of a wampum belt. In one row is a ship with our white brothers' ways. In the other, a canoe with our ways. Each will travel down the river of life side by side. Neither will attempt to steer the other's vessel. Now again, this is not the way it played out, but we are trying to come back to this in our practices around inquiry or research, and hopefully eventually in society too. Allies are people who recognize the unearned privilege they receive from society's patterns of injustice and take responsibility for changing those patterns. So what it means is you need to be humble and willing to be uncomfortable in different spaces. Have a sense of solidarity and to work for change in whatever way that makes sense for you, sometimes in a small way, sometimes in a larger way. Respect the land and the treaties, and hold governments accountable. Again, the way our system works, the white folks still have more power, so if we can speak up with our MPs and so on, we should be doing it. And particularly for those of us who are in the education field, we need to educate and make sure there's space for conversations about Indigenous peoples in the work that we do. Since the early days of the epidemic, we've been working with the principle of JIPA and MIPA, the greater or meaningful involvement of people living with HIV. Recently, a couple years ago, the International Indigenous Working Group on HIV and AIDS strategic plan articulated sort of the next step, or made explicit that this also means we need to improve meaningful inclusion of Indigenous peoples generally, but also Indigenous peoples living with HIV and AIDS in research, policy, and program development at the national, regional, and international levels. So that voice is very strong and is being heard now. It's not just about research, it's about policy and programming as well. And the IIWGHA is working hard to make sure that Indigenous issues around HIV are heard internationally. We all practice forms of what we call community-based or community-based participatory research or participatory research. And the reason I've got the C+A there is because in its framing, CBPR or CBR is all about community, that's the C, plus academics working together. And we work with these principles. So we understand community as a unit of identity. We are strengths-based in the way that we do the work. We aim for collaborative partnerships at all phases of the research, from question formulation right on through to KT, knowledge translation. And we hopefully start with questions that have been articulated by community, and if you're lucky like me, you were invited in as an academic rather than go to community to say, hey, I want to do some research with you guys. No, it's we need this, and would you come on this journey with us? It should integrate knowledge and action, so you don't just write a report and leave it there. You make sure that the results get used in services, in policy, and in action for social change. It's all about co-learning and capacity building, so we learn from each other, and we also, as non-community members, pledge to ensure that folks in community learn, grow in skills, and are able to take that forward in ways that's good for them. We acknowledge that it's cyclical, iterative, and relational. Once you get into CBR, you can never get out because it's all about relationships and friendships, and so one project leads to another. And the knowledge and information is for all partners. Okay, that's CBR. CBR, my experience of CBR is that it can be very powerful for all people involved and also can produce really good results. And so we're moving again from community-based research, where there's community and academics working in partnership, to community and, do we need the academics anymore? And their framework says the research is all about utility, has to directly benefit community. It's self-voicing. Community is now authoring the research question and authoring the knowledge, and they are the knowledge holders. Access is all about community access to local knowledge, practice, and experience in all their cultural manifestations. So now we're not talking about research data anymore, it's about way more than that. And interrelationality, so that the work is holistically situated, geopolitically positioned, and relational. And if all that is just too much words, think about that relational part again, right? This is all about slowing down and being in relationship with others as you do the work. And I think more and more we're seeing this in our work, and that's great. And part of that is because of the capacity that the AHA Centre and the NEARS have built within Indigenous community, where community is the researchers and researchers are the community, and people are doing it for themselves. Just to point out that decolonizing approaches are slightly different from Indigenous research approaches, although they blend. Everything always blends, and everyone always uses a very personal version. But the participatory action research forms the foundation of decolonizing work. It comes from the Southern and liberation traditions and is about, again, community taking action using research as a tool, and tries to build understandings of oppression or oppressions and create social change. Indigenous approaches may take on elements of PAR, participatory action research, but are, again, more about an Indigenous worldview, an Indigenous way of knowing and being and living that incorporates, yeah, wrap it up? Okay, I'll be quick. So self in relation and responsibility, connection to land and place, a holistic view of health. Everything is about relationship and knowledge is co-created, and that ceremony and cultural protocols are a very important part of the work.